So thank you everyone for staying, for those of you who stayed, and for joining us. I'm Nadege Green. I'm a journalist with WLRN, the NPR affiliate in South Florida, and we're just going to jump right in. We have an amazing panel. To my very, very far right is Representative Kim Mosier with Kentucky, in the state of Kentucky. Also, she's the Executive Director of Drug Control Policy in Northern Kentucky. We have Heather Rice-Minus with the Prison Fellowship, where she's Director of Governmental Affairs. She leads the fellowship's policy division, and she also works closely with community-based organizations. We have Teresa Hodge, co-founder of Mission Launch, which is a nonprofit that works with returning citizens, specifically focusing on entrepreneurial skills and technology skills. And we have Professor Geneva Brown with Valparaiso University School of Law, and much of her work looks at the intersections of race and gender in the criminal justice system. So we're gonna start with Representative Mosier. If you could just give us a brief intro into the work that you're doing with Reentry, and then we'll go into some moderated Q&A, but we do want to get to audience questions. Our time has been limited a little bit because of some of the overruns, but we know many of you have questions for our panelists, and so we'll get to that as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm really glad to be here with everyone today, and I'll just echo and say thank you for sticking around. I know it becomes a long day. So my background is nursing. I started in neonatal intensive care and flight nursing, and over the years I did a lot of work with the Kentucky Medical Association Alliance and medical legislative issues. Stepped into kind of this political role and helped out with some legislation on the opioid issue back in 2013-14. And then we decided, once some legislation passed, to open the Office of Drug Control Policy in Northern Kentucky, and so I head that up. My job as Director of Drug Control Policy in Northern Kentucky is to identify gaps and barriers in the continuum or the lack thereof. And one of those glaring barriers and one of the gaps in our system in working with the court system, drug courts, is the issue of women in prison and women in addiction. And so we have, I'm really abbreviating my notes, as you can see. But we have a lot of really strong programs happening, but one that I'd like to highlight really is one in the Campbell County Detention Center. Campbell County is one of the counties that I oversee. And we have this great program in our local jail, which really has provided that continuum, and it's a 6-month treatment program. We're working very closely with the judges in drug court and making sure that the women who are incarcerated are able to really complete the program. And then part of the program is to surround them with the support that they need when they are released. And so the women participate in the treatment program. They come up with their own plan, and they really, they almost present a portfolio at the end of it. And so they're surrounded with folks from the health department and the local hospital, and Brighton Center for Recovery really helps with a lot of the job training and continuing education, childcare issues, transportation, safe, stable housing, all of those things that we know are really going to help the women kind of reunite with their families, strengthen the families. We know that children who are born to women who have an addiction issue are really kind of stuck in a cycle through no fault of their own. And the only way to help the children and help the families really is to help the mom. And so that's what we're focused on, really supporting the mothers in a multitude of ways. There are faith-based groups. Like I said, we really try to identify everything that the mom needs up to 2 years following incarceration. So it's a really robust program. It's a great model. It's something that really can be dropped in any community, and we've talked about that. This is probably not unlike some of the programs that are going on, hopefully in your areas, but that's really, I guess, what I'll focus on in light of our time constraints, and certainly I can elaborate on that and anything else in my notes as we get going.
And I'm Heather Rice-Minus with Prison Fellowship. For those of you who aren't familiar with Prison Fellowship, we were founded by the late Chuck Colson, who was special counsel to President Nixon. And because of his involvement in the Watergate scandal, he actually landed himself in federal prison. And he promised the men he met there that he would not forget them. And when he got out, he founded Prison Fellowship, which is today the nation's largest ministry to prisoners and their families. We're very active in providing faith-based programs in a holistic way that really address a variety of people's needs, introduce them to Christian principles, match them with mentors and churches that will be welcoming to them when they come home, and have a lot of focus on women's facilities throughout the country. My role at Prison Fellowship focuses on our criminal justice reform. Because of Mr. Colson's involvement in politics, he recognized that we can't just do something to transform individual lives, we also have to transform the criminal justice system, and we need to address injustices when we see them, as Senator Booker was talking about today. And there are concrete action steps we can all take. I don't know about you all, but I was very encouraged and motivated to hear Senator Booker speak this morning and just kind of give us marching orders. And so in case I don't get an opportunity to do so later, there are some materials in the back on one of these tables at the very far back that I've laid out tips about advocacy. Also our Angel Tree program, which provides gifts to children on behalf of their incarcerated mom or dad, that I encourage you to take a look at. And there may also be a resource coming around if you're interested in signing up for our Advocates Network, so you can be informed of justice policies that are coming down the pike, and how to contact your legislator. You're welcome to sign up for that. And there's also, if you sign up, there's free copies of this Outrageous Justice book that you're welcome to take in the back as well. And I look forward to talking to you all today about some of the reentry policies that we work on to make sure that there's programming in place, not just after people are released, but also, reentry really needs to start far before people are back in their community. We need to be giving people the skills and connections to their family and all those things as soon as really arrest starts, not even before someone lands in prison. And then also we need to be looking at collateral consequences of conviction. When people get out, it's very hard for people to find a job, a house, even to volunteer or to go to a parent-teacher conference with your child at times. And so all of these are the challenges people with a criminal conviction face, particularly women have some very unique challenges. And those are some of the things we're trying to address at the state and federal level, bringing back some of those collateral consequences through reforms at the state and federal level.
Great. My name is Teresa Hodge, and I guess I could piggyback right where Heather was talking about. We need to make sure that we begin working on reentry when a person knows they're going to prison. For me, I served a 70-month federal prison sentence as a first-time white-collar nonviolent person. And if I back up, we've heard a lot of statistics today. And I can tell you that I am a person who did not fit that profile of a lot of the statistics we heard, although I was incarcerated with a lot of women who do fit that profile. And for me, I felt like it was very important that when I came home that I showed my face, my voice, and I told my story to speak about that other percentage of women who go to prison who we don't necessarily see or identify with. What I can tell you is that since coming home from prison, and I think I'll just start there, is what has worked best for me is knowing that I had a good support system. I left a good support system. I had a good support system that was there for me throughout my entire incarceration. I was a person who went to prison when I was 44 years old. I had put my daughter through college. A lot of women don't have that as their testimony when they're in prison. So I went to prison with 20 plus years of professional experience. While I was in prison, I spent that time watching, listening to the stories of the women who I heard. What I knew for sure was I had the ability to come home and get my life back on track, but I left very brokenhearted because I knew that many of the women who I had encountered would not have that same fate, and that bothered me. And so since coming home, I co-founded Mission Launch with my daughter, Lauren Hodge, who was graduating from college, who is sitting here today, and in the front row, raise your hand, Lauren. As a mother, you take these liberties. And so I co-founded Mission Launch with Lauren. And Mission Launch is a hybrid of who we are. I was an entrepreneur prior to incarceration, and when I was in prison, Lauren enrolled at Johns Hopkins and was getting a degree in Master's of Science in Information System and had an undergrad in sociology. So we brought our worlds together and we tried to be innovative in this space and to look at entrepreneurship. A lot of women, when they're coming home from prison, they're not going to get a job. And if you're not going to get a job, you have to create a job. And so it was a matter of how can we help people create a job. It doesn't mean that you're going to start the next tech company, but it might mean you're going to clean enough houses to take care of you and your family. And we started looking at technology, and interestingly enough, technology is underutilized in the criminal justice space. And so we wanted to see, could we innovate solutions around reentry that would make it more efficient? Technology has been used to lift countries out of poverty. And so the thought was, can we do the same thing for the 70 million Americans that are living with an arrest or conviction record?
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the Justice Action Network for inviting me on this panel, and I'm honored to be here with the women who are representing different organizations. I'm the only attorney on this panel, so I will speak from that perspective. I'm a former public defender. I was a public defender for nearly 10 years in the state of Wisconsin. And I saw a lot of, during the peak of the war on drugs, a lot of my clients would go to prison. And it seemed that no matter what I said, no matter what I did, no matter how good my sentencing argument was, my clients were going to prison, especially those who were charged with felony drug offenses. And so that actually stirred me in my scholarship when I transitioned to teaching at Valparaiso University Law School, to write about my experiences, but more so to write about the experiences of why the laws are different when you're an African American person, when you're Latino, when you're poor, why when there's uniform drug use, it seems to be an overexposure of African American, Latino, and poor people in the prison system. So part of that also is what happens when you get out of prison. I could negotiate a great prison sentence, someone gets out, but unfortunately, the statistics show that 2/3 of those people who get out will come back again, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And also the problems of having poor programs while you're in prison don't help you when you get out of prison, which also sets people up to fail. And the other unfortunate part is that people seem to make a lot of money off of incarcerating people and pushing policies that keep people locked up. So I'm here to talk about reentry, but those are the interests that I have. But what I also am interested in are the conditions that women are under, especially African American women when they get out. Conditions that are imposed on them, not just by federal laws, but by supervised conditions where they may not have a romantic partner, where they are not allowed to live certain places, they're not allowed to associate with certain people, they have to get a job, but they have to report to probation. If they don't report, they get a warrant issued on them, random searches of their homes. So there are multiple levels where it's just hard for an adjustment once you are released from prison. You can't get financial aid only if you go through an application process, if you do drug testing, if you are going to go through a drug education program, where those programs that allow you to do that to actually qualify for financial aid. For public housing, there was a report in 2013 that says even though the federal HUD programs are not onerous, how they're interpreted by the cities where they're in can be onerous. So they run your name if you put in an application, or you come home from an institution, you want to go home, you want to go with your kids, if your kids are in foster care, and you can't get in because you have a prior record, especially if you're a drug offender, you may not be allowed to live at home. If you want to become a cosmetologist, be an entrepreneur. You can't do that. You're not allowed to be a licensed cosmetologist. You can't be a real estate person. So things that would allow you to go meet the conditions of your probation, to allow you to become reentered, fully integrated into society, you're blocked from. So those are the things that I write about. Those are the conditions that continue to alarm me. And also with the new edict that has come down from our most recent Attorney General that basically says we're going to charge drug cases to the maximum. I don't want to see a war on drugs Part 2 happen. So hopefully Senator Booker's initiatives will pass, and What I have to say will be passé. I'd be happy to not talk about this again, but unfortunately, I think this conversation will continue.
So one of the first questions, and we're going to get to the audience questions soon-ish, is when we talk about reentry, we have to take into account that a lot of these women are single moms. 80% of the women who interact with the criminal justice system are mothers. Representative Mosier, in Kentucky, you all actually have the distinction of leading the country with the most children who have incarcerated parents, double the national average. So this is supposed to be a conference about solutions, specifically what is happening when you talk about reentry as it relates to single mothers in Kentucky and some of the other spaces we occupy for sure. But like, what policies are in place right now in Kentucky, or what specific programming that you can point to that says this is working or this could be working better when it comes to reuniting mothers with their children and making sure that they are able to live with dignity and rebuild?
Right. Well, I can speak to some of the things that we're working on in Kentucky. Last session, we did pass a Criminal Justice Reform Act, and that includes a lot of job training and some connection to businesses who are willing to partner and really bring the mothers some experience while they're still incarcerated and moving toward reentry. So they're getting some job training. They are getting continuing education while they're still in prison. But as far as reuniting with their children, I don't know that there's not legislation around that issue, but some of the local policies that we work on in bringing the Nurturing Center, for example, into the program that I talked about, teaches the women parenting skills and the case management through Brighton Center Recovery Center really focuses on the health of the kids and giving the moms, I guess, tools to really be able to parent her children while continuing treatment and maintaining her sobriety, maintaining that support system. We have a huge foster care problem, so optimally we want to rehabilitate fully the mom and reintegrate and reunite the family.
Heather, what are you seeing policy-wise, the type of work that is happening or perhaps not happening when it comes to really focusing on the fact that these are single moms? Mm-hmm. Because being a single mom means you need childcare, which is very expensive.
Right.
And so when we talk about things like going out into a job field, get a job, be better, how do you do that when you don't have access to childcare?
Right. I think it's more so the lack of what's happening at in terms of policy. Just yesterday, we were having a discussion about the federal system, which is a lot of what I focus on, is our campaign to Congress. And the federal prison system offers, compared to states, very little good time credit and very little earned time credit. So credit you can get while you're in prison for either maintaining good behavior or doing programs that are going to equip you for reentry. And there's really only one program at the federal level that provides credit off someone's sentence as an incentive to participate in the residential drug abuse program, which has a long waiting list. And so I think one of the things we need to see more so either in policy from the Bureau of Prisons as well as potentially legislation like what Senator Booker has proposed is looking at programs that are actually specific to the needs of women and keep that connection with children who are really oftentimes the forgotten victims of our criminal justice system. One program I will just mention, as I said earlier, is the Angel Tree program through Prison Fellowship. And so that allows moms and dads to sign up to give their child a gift at Christmas time while they're incarcerated. And then churches, they actually fill it out in a little angel that gets put up at churches on a tree, and then you can select a child and deliver that gift to them. And it's something that we were talking about earlier that I think is a small connection to keep that relationship alive. But if I could call on you just to share, I think it's not just that program, but just in general, how much that means to be able to keep that relationship going.
Right. So when Heather was talking about that particular program, I told her I ran that program at Alderson for the 5 years that I was there, and how it wasn't a small program. It was a huge program because it speaks to what we're talking about today, dignity. It allowed a mother to remain a mother. It allowed a mother to be able to send a gift to her child on behalf of someone else. And so that was huge to the woman, but it was also huge to the family, and it kept the connection together. And if I can transition it just a little bit, is that as we're talking about, there's 700,000 estimated people who are returning home from prison every year. That's 700,000 families that we have an opportunity to reconnect. And we can't lose sight of that. When we look at reentry, a judge has made a decision that on that particular date, that person had been punished enough for the crime. And so now it's about what is the path forward for that individual. And so I often think we don't need a lot of legislation. We need people who are in corporations, on jobs, just normal citizens, to have our hearts and minds changed enough that when a person comes home from prison, that we're willing to accept our community members back into our community. They're not estranged from us. They didn't stop being citizens. We've been struggling with this terminology, returning citizens, formerly incarcerated. Like, there's not a good word, because in the end, we're just people who've gone to prison and now we're home. And, if we look at even pay disparities, kind of like nationally, women earn about 66% less, or 66 cents on a dollar for every man. When you start to layer incarceration and some of the other social stigmas on top of that, then what we're talking about is a woman not being in a position to take care of their family. I like what Representative Moser was talking about and all this, because we need holistic approaches. You can't come up with, we need a job, we need this, we need that. I love a program that's A New Way of Life out in California, because often when women come home, because there was so much trauma associated with their life to go to prison, and potentially trauma while they were in prison, they need a center that just welcomes them, that allows them to come home and to begin to heal from all that has transpired. And while they're healing, all of these other services have to enter. And what we really need is just layers upon layers upon layers of services. And we have to just make sure that if we're talking about criminal justice reform, we can reform the fact that 65% of the people go back to prison. That's something we can do. That doesn't require legislation, that requires community support.
I want to start opening up to some questions, because I'm sure I'm going to get the 5-minute mark, 10-minute mark signed soon. Does anyone have any questions? So one hand shoot up very quickly. There is a mic coming up, and then we'll kind of go around for as long as we can until they tell us to get out. Wait, okay, she's going to pick who she wants.
I'm going to direct this question mostly to Professor Brown. One of the realities of reentry is interaction with probation and parole. And I have heard concerns of people on probation and parole about the restriction of, or this diminishment of Fourth Amendment rights of search and seizure. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Actually, the New York Times did a great story on that. I believe it was a few days ago, about the conditions that offenders face when they are out. And frankly, search and seizure doesn't really apply. You don't have rights as a full citizen as long as you are under supervision. You're also counted as a person who is still part of the Department of Corrections. So technically, you're not free. So it's not that the Fourth Amendment does not apply to you, but you are under still the control and the say-so of the Department of Corrections. So as was just mentioned by Ms. Hodge, you have 700,000 people who are going to be in the supervised population, who may or may not make it depending upon the relationship they have with their PO, as we like to say. It depends on the conditions that are put upon them. Will they be humanistic? Will they be holistic? Or will they be draconian? I mean, is a person allowed to have a support network if that person hasn't met or it does not meet the requirements or the criteria of the PO? There's a lot of power that's wielded there that goes unsupervised. As a former public defender, that's something I can't negotiate. Now, I can negotiate time, I can negotiate credit, but there's not an advocate for that person once they're released.
Next question. And then we'll come around to you.
Thank you very much. I feel like I'm talking, I have a big mouth. I don't know whether it's the mic or me. I'm good. Okay. I just want to, first of all, thank all of you for your presentations, and especially Teresa. My question is really a comment, and it's not a shameless plug because I'm quite proud of it, because we are working, Teresa is on an advisory committee with myself and others, she mentioned Susan Burton, and we've launched a project called Justice Voices, Storytelling for Change. And it's the women, it's specifically focused on women, formerly incarcerated women, mostly African American and women of color, but all women who have traveled the traumas and triumphs of mass incarceration. And the thing that I think is so important that Teresa does and so many other women who have come home whole is to tell their story and to give inspiration to other women, but also to let the general public understand that these people, it's not even about a second chance, it's just about humanity and that their voice matters. So I just wanted to give that plug. I have some bookmarks for Justice Voices, and you can visit it online, justicevoices.com. So thank you very much.
Hello, my name is LaShawna. My question is for anybody. I would love to hear from all of the panelists about what are your thoughts about women who have been convicted of violent offenses being excluded from some of the policies and programs that are being created or that have been in practice. So for one example, people in federal prison who are convicted of violent crimes can't get the year off if they do the drug program. Or in this new bill that has been introduced by the senators, they are proposing that women be able to get overnight visits from their children and family members, but they exclude violent offenders from that. And also to bring into the room Michelle West, somebody who a lot of women advocated tirelessly for when women were getting clemency under Obama, and because she has some violence in her charge, even though she's a co-defendant of a man who she went to prison with, because there's some violence in her charge, we believe that she was excluded from that process, which she probably would have gotten clemency had she not had that. So I would love to hear from you guys, and what could you arm us with when we're speaking to people about the importance of including women who have been convicted of violent crimes, who are also mothers, and who are also victims of trauma, and who are also oftentimes returning to the community after incarceration. What would you give us to share with people to help them to remain empathetic and compassionate toward those women?
Can we get one person to answer that? I know you want to hear from everyone, but we're not going to get enough time because I know we had a question all the way in the back as well, but is there someone who?
If I can just briefly, if someone else, I'd be happy to shut up. But I think that's the paradox, is that you have thanks to Lee Atwater and the unfortunate use of race and incarceration to scare people is from a long time ago. Violent offenders are used as kind of a scapegoat to frighten people, to keep people locked up. And that's a paradox because we want to get nonviolent offenders out. We want people like Ms. Hodge to come out to be rehabilitated. She's a wonderful representation of someone who has the will and ability to rehabilitate herself and also to help others as well. But if she had a violent offense, she'd probably still be sitting in prison. And the irony is that violent offenders actually have fairly low recidivism rates, but a lot of people don't know that. And who's going to be the politician who's going to stand up and say, I want to see violent offenders released because I know that they have low recidivism rates. It just takes one or two bad situations to completely mar an entire program. Lots of states had early release programs, and they didn't necessarily distinguish between violent and nonviolent because they knew the violent offender had a low recidivism rate. But unfortunately, it takes one heinous case, it takes one misstep, and all of those things were wiped out. So if you want to advocate for the violent offender, because I can say that it's going to be a tough practice to do. I don't know who's going to publicly stand next to you, who's going to be a politician, who's going to say that I advocate for this as well. But I think what you have to focus on is the low recidivism rate and unfortunately distinguishing this person from the stereotypes that people have of violent offenders.
I mean, Representative Mosier, since you're the only politician up here,
Sure.
did you want to respond?
That's okay, you can pick on me. You know, I guess when I'm thinking about how you break down a problem and you look for solutions, you know, we know that there are assessments. We know that there are different ways of measuring progress through whatever the program is. Hopefully there's a program in the prison where, you know, these women are basically being housed now, and hopefully they're truly being rehabilitated. You know, there's a lot of talk about criminal justice reform, and so I think part of criminal justice reform needs to be looking at how we measure progress and what are the questions that we're asking. What, you know, I mean, put programs in place that actually help the women, even if they have a violent offense on their record, give them some tools to overcome that. And so I think that, you know, it's maybe not one big blanket policy or one thing that's going to help, but I think putting smaller programmatic policies in place that really help rehabilitate the women and have measurable outcomes. I think that, you know, that's always actual data is very convincing to policymakers. So, you know, I think that when we're developing our programs, we need to think about putting some things in place that allow women to move forward. I hope that helps.
May I just add one quick thing to the question of eligibility for programming? One thing, there's pros and cons to either way of doing this, but what often happens for political reasons is that violent offenses, people with violent offenses get, that's written in as they're not eligible for those. One thing that's happening as a discussion point is, should we shift from just creating eligibility based on someone's offense to should we create eligibility based on risk assessment? And so that gets back to recidivism rates and other factors. And so that's one way someone doesn't have to say, take kind of political heat for supporting violent offenses, if you will, but allows a more nuanced way of looking at whether someone should be eligible for an early release date and incentivizes programs for people. We want to get programs and participate in programs, right? So I just wanted to mention that quickly.
We had a question straight ahead.
Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for being here, for what you're doing today. I'm a person who never intends to get married and have children, and so when I'm in discussions about womanhood, and the entire discussion is about motherhood, it kind of bothers me. So I'm curious to know, what is the difference in reentry needs for women who are not mothers?
The reason we started with motherhood is based off the data. 80% of these women are single moms, and so it's not to say the 20% who are not worthy at all. But you know, it's when we're having this discussion, it was talking about specifically who is broadly impacted and what are the resources available. And since this is about solutions, I think it is important that we talk about the solutions, right? And this is potentially a solution for 80% of the people who interact with the criminal justice system, is that childcare is a big issue that could keep someone from getting a job or having access. And so that's why we're talking about that. And because we know in Kentucky, for example, nearly 13% of children have parents who are incarcerated. And so we are talking about it because it is based off of the data that exists. But that's not to say that single moms, women who are not mothers, single women who interact with the criminal justice system are not part of this conversation. I wish we had longer because we would touch on much more broader topics. But to answer your question, that's why you heard quite a bit early on about motherhood.
And if I can just add to that, all women who are coming home, for the most part, are going to need the same thing, whether they're mothers or not. You're going to need a job. You're going to need a place to live. There's just basic fundamental needs that have to be met, regardless of what your family structure is or the decisions that you've made around your own reproduction and whether you're going to be married or not. So I know a lot of women who were single and did not have children and still don't have children, but their needs are the same as my needs when we came home from prison. And I'm going to just throw in real quick for LaShania's question, which is 95% of the people who are in prison come home from prison. We are not going to reform our system by focusing only on nonviolent offense. We have to focus on that population as well. And we have to look at the fact that none of us want to be locked into a single thing that we've done, even if it's our worst mistake in life, and be defined by that forever. As people are going through the prison system, they're changing, they're evolving. None of us are the same that we were 10, 15 years ago. You know, thank God, probably many of us might even say. So, you know, we have to allow people to be able to move beyond their, you know, criminal background. And, you know, from a fiscal responsibility, if you're a conservative, if we do not help people when they come home from prison be able to become self-sufficient, then we are leaving a strong dependency on states and local governments that we can't afford.
Absolutely.
And just briefly talking about women who hadn't planned on being mothers, there are women who are raising other women's children who maybe hadn't planned on being mothers, either who are through foster care, through being an aunt, through grandparenting, when you're thinking your parenting is over. So even though we're talking about motherhood, we have to open our concept of what motherhood means, and that as a community, we're raising children, and that as a woman who's coming back, who is someone's child, not just whether or not that person has, someone who's coming home to a mother and sisters, extended family. So I just say, let's open up our ideas of what motherhood and also what family means, and that it's not a term that's meant to be narrowing. It's actually meant to be far broader than what we understand, and that women with no children, women who aren't married, women who I'm saying all that basically just to say, for us to have no more Women Unshackled conferences, for us to have successful reentry, we need a positive, holistic environment for women to return to.
I saw a hand peek.
Hi, can you speak to the recidivism rates of women with violent offenses versus that of women who don't have violent offenses? I'm not sure if you know the statistics at all, but you mentioned it was fairly low. I'm sorry, Professor Brown.
Sure, it is. I am speaking an aggregate, so I can't with 100% certainty say women who are committed violent offenses are less likely to. But I can certainly tell you that women who are charged with violent offenses are sometimes charged as a co-conspirator or as an accessory after the fact or as an accessory along with. So maybe they're not the person who actually committed the violent offense, but unfortunately they made some poor dating choices, or this is a person who they've been romantically linked to. So once that person's involved, you decide to give that person a ride. You don't know what that person's engaged in, or you do know what that person's engaged in. Whatever the criminal activity that leads you to be caused to be a co-conspirator, you're charged as though you had actually committed the murder yourself or the violent offense yourself. So those are women who are caught up and labeled in things that they may not have done. And statistics do show that women are becoming more violent, but I think also as part of a community that has seen increases in violence as well. And women, Black women in particular, because I do domestic violence work as well, I direct a domestic violence clinic. Black women are atypical when it comes to victimology because we have a tendency to fight back. And because law enforcement comes into a situation where they don't understand culturally, Black women will defend themselves, they end up being labeled the violent person. So it's interesting what violence means depending on who the person is, who's the victim, who's the offender, and what the cultural context is.
So, and Heather, was there something you wanted to add on that?
In terms of the statistics?
Yes.
I don't have a breakout for men versus women in terms of violent offenses, but just that I always find it unique when people tend to think of higher risk individuals as those who commit violent offenses. You know, oftentimes, as the professor said earlier, their rates tend to be lower than nonviolent offenses, and oftentimes that can be linked to substance abuse or mental health issues that are associated maybe with lower level crimes, but prevent that person from really leading a new life. Whereas someone who commits a violent offense, it may be in the heat of passion and a one-time kind of thing. So, yeah.
I have some statistics
Oh,
here.
great.
There you go.
See, my notes came in handy. So I have that of the 3,065 women in custody, 899 were drug crimes, 742 were property crimes, so theft probably, 699 were DUI and public order crimes, and 534 were violent offenses. So there.
So on that note, we have to wrap up. I got my sign. But if you would like to continue this conversation, all of the panelists are here. Feel free to get cards afterwards. They are on Twitter. Their @handles are inside of your booklets. And so we can definitely continue this conversation outside of this room, and hopefully these conversations will continue outside of this room. Thank you all so much.